Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted more happiness and inner strength, then do we have the Resilient Show for you. Today I'll be talking with Dr. Rick Hanson, neuropsychologist, brain expert, and the best-selling author of Hardwiring Happiness, Just One Thing, The Buddha's Brain, and an absolutely brilliant must-read of a book, Resilient. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about how to find your inner strength one simple step at a time. That, plus we'll talk about the importance of climbing trees, the east buttress of Mount Whitney, the importance of petting a cat, gotcha, why zebras don't get ulcers, capsizing boats without keels, been there myself, retrieving jackets and Yosemite, primal screaming encounter groups and bare your soul on demand, and what in the world Gandalf, Spock, and the fairy godmother have to do with anything. So welcome back to the show, Rick. Are you ready to shine?
Michael, I swear that is the best introduction I think I've ever gotten on one of these kind of shows. That was remarkable. And it tells me that you've actually read my book. So I really appreciate that.
Oh, then a mighty woohoo! My job is done. And yes, I have read your book, Rick. I love your book. And there's way more than we could cover in like probably a half a dozen interviews.
Yeah.
But it's powerful. I'm going to recommend it to everybody. We're going to dive into so much of it, as much as we can here. In fact, let's start with, first off, we're going to do just the briefest introduction on you because people can listen to our past shows. How did you get into the human potential movement in the 70s?
Wow. Short version, I was pretty unhappy. I was pretty miserable. And a light bulb went off inside me in my teens on my way to college. I skipped a grade and I have a late birthday. So I entered college at 16. And soon before I went into college, I had this deep, for me, life-changing insight that seems so obvious in retrospect, like many life-changing insights, which was that I could not do anything about the past. Even in the moment, it was what it was, including a lot of unhappiness. But every day I could learn and grow, become more skillful, become wiser, become better, become happier. It was something I could do every day. I could learn broadly every single day. And that gave me enormous hope. And it meant that I increasingly would actually be the captain of my own ship. I'd be the master of my own fate over time. And the takeaway as well was that if learning is profoundly important and hopeful and wonderful, and I mean emotional learning, social learning, body learning, spiritual learning, if learning is what's incredibly hopeful, if learning is the superpower that grows all the other superpowers inside ourselves, learning how to learn is the most important thing to learn of all.
Ooh, I like it. We're going to dive into that. I don't know why I feel called to mention. I had this dog for 17 years, service dog Sawa. In her early years, I had a lot of control over her. Do this, don't do that, Sawa. And she became kind of the shaky, nervous being. She was a little Brittany, and she was kind of shaky and nervous. Once I had, and you just said, master of my own fate, once I gave her more self-agency, allowed her to make decisions, allowed her to call the shot, everything changed. The same as with us, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. It's a deep issue of safety, if you think about it. If we don't feel that we at least can, like one of the very first things that happens with infants is they learn how to regulate their gaze, including looking away from something that's scary or they don't want to pay attention to. And that is a very fundamental sense, beginning within the first months of life, of being in some way a hammer inside yourself rather than just a nail. And one of the core things that the book talks about, including, as you know, in the very first chapter, is how to develop more of a sense of being an agent on your own behalf. In other words, I don't mean a secret agent. I mean a sense of being for yourself, not against others, but on your own side. Encouraging yourself, and every day, rather than being dead in the water in your own life, looking for ways to contribute and grow and develop every single day.
Beautiful. So let's double back. The title of the book is Resilient. What is resilience? How are you defining that?
Great. Resilience is what we draw upon for two main things: surviving the worst day of our life and thriving every day of our life. Resilience is this unshakable core inside us that can weather the storms and waves and irritating, snarky glances across a dinner table or one-star reviews of your book on Amazon and keep on going. That's resilience. Resilience is necessary for any kind of lasting well-being in a changing world. I think a lot of self-help and positive psychology and psychotherapy is offered as a kind of magic carpet ride. Oh, just do this thing. Just tap yourself in this way or say this affirmation or do this meditation and suddenly, whoosh, you'll be all happy. Well, that's part of the story. But down here on planet Earth, we got to deal. We got to cope. We have to adapt, especially in our relationships. We have to manage difficulties. We have to manage, as the Buddha taught a long time ago, inevitable, if we're lucky, old age, disease, and death, and the loss of others as well along the way. We got to deal with these things. So resilience is necessary for lasting well-being. And what's necessary for resilience are psychological resources of various kinds: grit, gratitude, compassion, motivation, intimacy, courage, aspiration, even generosity. And as you know in the book, these inner strengths, in my model, there are 12 of them that are key, are what I show people how to develop each day.
Beautiful. And we're going to dive into many of them. Before we do that, since we talk about positive psychology and things that aren't working or not maybe necessarily having stick, what are the 2 stages to developmental resources, and why is B so often missing?
Oh, that's great. Well, you know my material. The summary of this is given in the neat saying, more and more people have heard it: neurons that fire together, wire together. So we have these 2 stages. First, we have to have an experience of whatever we want to grow or a related factor. Let's suppose a person wants to grow more of a bone-deep feeling of self-acceptance and self-worth, just as you are. It doesn't mean you're indulgent or arrogant or narcissistic. It's the secure base inside yourself from which you guide yourself and look for ways to be a little wiser, a little happier, a little more loving, a little more skillful the next day. All right. So if you want to grow that, you've got to get those neurons firing together. You got to begin with an experience. But if you leave off the second stage, if you don't help those neurons wire together, that experience, by definition, was wasted. It was wasted on your brain. It might have been momentarily pleasant or useful, but it had no lasting value. And it's that second step that people routinely forget. People routinely kind of assume that experiencing equals learning. No, experiencing does not equal learning. Most of our beneficial experiences have no lasting value. They don't change us at all for the better. But meanwhile, every little experience of irritation or hurt or loneliness or self-criticism, because of the brain's negativity bias, goes right in. So that's why I focus, as you know, and you've been really great at this yourself. And people who are super learners like you already know this intuitively. I've built out a model of this based on how the brain actually works. But the essence is really simple. When you're having any kind of a useful, enjoyable experience, you got that song playing on the inner iPod, turn on the recorder at least half a dozen times a day to help that experience sink in and become physically hardwired into your own brain.
We went, my wife and I can't believe I forgot about this. We went to, a year and a half ago, was it? The total solar eclipse. My wife and I paddled out on a lake in South Carolina for the totality. And I just had this vision that the clouds were going to part moments beforehand and we would see a total eclipse. And it was real cloudy, started showering, we paddled out. Then moments before the clouds parted, it goes black, the corona comes out, the shooting golden light around this like black sun. And I was thinking of you and I said, anchor it, anchor in the moment.
That's great. And how many moments like that does a person have in a year or a day? Not that many. So on the one hand, we need to value them. And I think it's also super important to kind of hoover up like a vacuum cleaner all the little ordinary jewels that are strewn along our path each day that we normally step right over. Those little moments of accomplishing a task or feeling friendly, connected with another person like you and I right now, or see something beautiful, a flower, a bush, a cloud, a pigeon, or recognizing some good quality inside yourself, or taking away some lesson about how to be more skillful in managing a meeting or dealing with a difficult relationship. When we encounter those ordinary jewels as we go through each day, lots and lots of diamonds and rubies and sapphires, why not slow down for a breath or two or three to stay with the experience, to feel it in your body, and to focus on what's rewarding about it? And each one of those three little methods, staying with it, embodying it, and tracking what's rewarding about it, will neurologically increase its installation as a lasting physical change in your own nervous system.
Yeah, it's something you talk about in chapter 1 on compounding. Little things add up over time. And I'm guessing there's even an amplifier to it because it's a self-rewarding mechanism.
That's beautiful. That's extremely insightful on your part. You're exactly right. There's a compounding process. I mean, there's a kind of a proverb that really says it. What you appreciate appreciates, right? It's kind of glib, and yet it's really quite profound. And what happens over time, one of the benefits of this practice is that much as the brain can become sensitized to the worse through stress, loneliness, or even ordinary experiences of rushing about and feeling all pressured inside, the brain becomes more and more vulnerable to those negative experiences in a vicious cycle. Similarly, though, as you take in the good increasingly, as you rest your attention on what is factually good, but then in particular, draw it into yourself, then what happens is you sensitize your brain to the positive so that it becomes more efficient and more rapidly able to be changed for the better by those experiences. That's a lovely upward positive cycle.
Beautiful. So let's go from there, talking about lovely upward positive cycles. We're going to dive into compassion. And I want to talk about being good to yourself, why it's good to be good to yourself. What happened when you were 6, standing outside on the cornfields, looking into the water there?
Man, you know my stuff. Well, actually, that's a very sacred moment to me. It was it's been one of the central experiences of my life. Very simply said, I was 6. We were living in Illinois on the edge of cornfields, as you say. And what I'm aware of is looking back at my house where the yellow light was shining through the windows. It was dusk. And there was a very poignant, wistful sadness in me about probably some just fairly typical bickering and hassling and pressure inside the house. No abuse, nothing horrible, which it makes a larger point that even in not horrible schools or neighborhoods or living rooms, a lot of wear and tear can occur that really adds up, especially on children, including myself then. So there I was outside the house, and what I'm extremely aware of right now, even as I pull up the memory, very present in me, was not anger at what was happening, but a just deep clarity that I wasn't going to get my major needs met there. And I had to find other ways to meet them. And that it was really on me. And it was very tender. It was clear-eyed. There was just a deep clarity, a deep knowing in that mind of a 6-year-old. I think we often underestimate how wise and clear young children can be, particularly at certain moments where they really see things. And then in the distance, far in the distance, from the cornfields were lights that were flickering in the hills there. And I just knew that somehow out there in those lights and in other places with other people, I would find my true home eventually. And that really set me on my way.
Beautiful. And what does it then mean that it's good to be good to yourself?
It's a very sweet point. I think in that experience are some takeaways. So for one, I wasn't at war with my parents, loving, decent people, under a lot of pressure themselves. They grew up in certain ways. They didn't have all the skills in the world of emotional intelligence that I think people these days are more and more able to develop. So I wasn't against them to be for myself. I wasn't caught up in a war with them. And I think that's an important point. We can still be kind toward others and compassionate, and we can see them and see the good in them, even as we stand up for ourselves. Very important point. Second, being good to yourself doesn't mean indulging yourself. Sometimes being good to yourself is to say to yourself firmly, as a good parent says to a child, or a good human might say to a dog, don't be a fool. Don't do that. No, no. One cookie is enough, or one drink is enough. Enough is enough. You need to get out of bed and you got to go exercise. All right. Every little bit adds up over time. You can be firm with yourself with the quality of guidance rather than criticism. In other words, you're building yourself up rather than tearing yourself down. It means that. And I think I'll just say one last thing that I think it means in the core. It means claiming to yourself what I and others would consider, I think, the most fundamental of human freedoms and human rights. The right to know for yourself what you know, and the right to decide what you decide for yourself, the right to choose what you choose, your own right to claim it. I will see what I see and I will choose what I choose. It may not be safe enough to tell you what I see or to reveal what I've chosen. And I may have to bide my time. I knew at that age 6 or so that I had at least 10, if not more years ahead of me before I really could kind of break away into my own life. I'd served out my sentence in a sense, and frankly is how it felt. But that right to see the facts that you see and to feel that you are entitled to make your own fundamental choices within your own code, within the frame of your own integrity, not being evil, but you have the fundamental right to shape your own life as you will. That, if you think about it, is what is most firmly attacked in pathological systems, in sick families, sick organizations, and frankly, sick governments, tyrannical governments. They attack people's capacity to discern the truth, and they attack their faith in their ability to know the truth, and they attack the value of facts and other forms of truth. And so reclaiming that for yourself is a really, really fundamental aspect of being on your own side. That might seem incredibly obvious to many people, but to many, many people, in my experience, especially those whose truth has been muzzled or shamed, especially people who belong to certain groups that routinely has happened to, including women, historically, for example. Many, many people, this issue I'm zeroing in on here is absolutely fundamental, and it's the very first thing to work on.
So, and there's dovetailing off of that, when that takes place, and it's interesting, you're talking about an erosion of truth, you start to forget, you lose trust and faith in your own self and your own ability to discern.
Yes, that's exactly right. Self-doubt creeps in. And also, understandably, people become afraid of being visibly confident about what they see, what they know, and their own view about what ought to happen. Because when they did that as a kid, or in their first marriage, let's say, or their first job, bam, they were attacked. There's a Japanese proverb, the nail that stands out gets hammered down. Or, in Australia, the tall poppy syndrome, you get taken down. And so people then live smaller and smaller and smaller lives, understandably, to avoid the dreaded experience of a shaming attack, typically. And the problem then is that even though that might have been necessary in that situation or that childhood environment, you don't need to do it today. So then people live their lives walking around inside a suit of armor that's 3 sizes too small. And so it's very helpful to become aware of the experiences you dread, because those shape the bounds of your life and make your life a lot smaller than it needs to be. So one of the things that I develop in the book, as you know, is a lot of inner resources that enable people to increasingly risk the dreaded experience, push back the bars of their invisible cage, and then help it usually go well when they do, and internalize the results to live their life more and more broadly and freely.
beautiful. In fact, talking about risk and inner resources, one of the key tools is acceptance. And maybe that becomes so powerful. You have an amazing example climbing the East Buttress on top of Mount Whitney.
Well, you're getting my greatest hit. So in a sense, so there it was. I'm a rock climber, and Mount Whitney is, as you know, it's the tallest mountain in the continental U.S. And we climbed it by an intermediate route that rather than hiking up the backside. And it was October. It was cold. It was late, and we were young and foolish, so we made some dumb mistakes and got to the top through this rock climbing route. But we were going to come down the way John Muir originally climbed the mountain, up this chute full of soft snow, except it was October and the snow had all turned to ice. And so we could not get down at all rapidly. It took forever to come down, very, very slowly, and dark came upon us. And at that point, we had a fateful choice. Should we keep on going and risk a fall to our death, or sit on a ledge, freeze our tush off all night long, but live to see the sunrise? So we made the wise choice, the latter choice, and I am still here today to tell the story. What we had to do in that situation, we had to accept the reality of our circumstance. We didn't like it, but we had to see it clearly for what it is. As the Buddha taught in others as well, and what is a very scientific attitude, ignorance is the root of all suffering. Or to put it differently, it's the truth that sets us free. So we needed to see the truth of our circumstances and accept it. We also needed to accept our own reactions. Very often, people can accept their environment. They accept the people around them. They don't accept themselves. Not in a fundamental kind of way. They don't let their feelings be what they are. They fight them and resist them and feel ashamed of them or angry at them. They're mean to themselves rather than inclusive and embracing of themselves. And people think oftentimes that that's how to be a peak performer. Actually, no. If you study people who have been long-term marathon, not just one-hit wonders, but long-term peak performers in multiple business environments, in multiple acts of their life. Unlike what F. Scott Fitzgerald said, no, I think it was Thomas Wolfe. Oops. I think there are a lot of second acts and third and fourth and fifth and sixth acts in people's lives these days. So what you see in people like that is a lot of self-acceptance. They accept themselves and they're going to try to do better tomorrow.
I love it. So you're up on the hill. We're going to try to go through as many of these 12 as we can. We might move rapidly here, but you're up on the hillside. Your feet are in the backpack trying to stay warm. You got the space blanket on you. Yep. And it brings us to mindfulness. How did you and how do we steady the mind? Because at that point, it can be your greatest friend or your greatest foe.
That's very interesting. It also gets at what we mean by mindfulness and mind and all that, not to play word games, but just to be clear what we're talking about. So I would say that what I was able to establish there in my mid-20s, I had done a fair amount of personal growth work kind of leading up to it, was a feeling of the mind in a sense like sky, through which storm clouds of shivering and irritation with my partner and some choices that got made and seeing the lights 10 miles away of the city, 5,000 feet beneath us, where I'm sure people were having, I fantasized about it all night long, hot apple pie a la mode with a cup of coffee. I really wanted it. Those are the clouds moving through the sky of awareness. And that's one way, I think, to really understand mindfulness as the capacity to sustain a sense of being the sky, witnessing the clouds moving through without identifying them or grasping after the ones you like or fighting with the ones you don't like. So that's a way I would talk about mindfulness. And I came to it, I think, in a way that a lot of people can come to mindfulness, which is you just observe directly. When you drop into that sky place, suffering diminishes. You get calmer, you get centered. But when you get caught up in fighting those clouds, it hurts more. And that's very motivating.
How do we train ourselves to be mindful of being mindful?
That's a deep, deep question, isn't it? Technically, in your brain,
Yeah.
among multiple systems that are involved in this, there's a part of the brain called the cingulate cortex, and the more frontal regions of that, they're called anterior rather than posterior in the back. And I'm saying this because you'll sometimes hear people talk about the anterior cingulate cortex or just the acronym ACC. So it's kind of nice to know what in the heck they're talking about. Yeah. All right. And there are two of them. Well, this part of the brain is very involved in self-monitoring and observing whether you're converging on your goals or falling off. So if your goal is to remain mindful, this anterior cingulate cortex is in effect kind of like an inner watcher inside you who lets you know, stay on target, 5 by 5, 5 by 5, come back. And you can develop that part of your brain over time, especially through deliberate practices of concentration. My own meditative practice really took off when I began focusing more on what's called steadiness of mind, or shamatha in Pali or Sanskrit, concentration. And what people can do if they want is pick something that's not very stimulating. Nobody has attention issues playing a video game. You're zeroed in. Pick something that's not very stimulating, like the feeling of breathing or a candle flame or a word that you repeat over and over again in your mind, and resolve to stay with that, just that, for some period of time, like 10 breaths in a row or a minute of attention to breathing or the candle, or maybe 5 or even 10 minutes. Just try that. You will learn so much about your own mind in that 1 or 5 or 10 minutes. In part, you will start to become very aware as you lock onto that particular object of attention. All the siren songs, all the distractors, all the bubbling crud that just wants to pull you away. By contrast, and you would never see it. You would never see it. You would never see it on a time course of just a second. Slowly arising, intensive a second, tick, 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 coalescing by about a quarter of a second, then really trying to grab you over the next half second, and then moment of choice in that second. Do you get hijacked by it, or do you stay with your meditation object?
Beautiful. So from there, let's go to learning, which you call the superpower of superpowers. One thing that really stuck out in this section to me, you say, the rich soup of empathy children need from their parents.
Wow, that's really true. We're deeply, deeply social. My parents were both extremely loving and decent people, conscientious, wonderful. They loved us. And each in their own way, they were not very good at empathy for different reasons, somewhat related to growing up during the Depression in really difficult circumstances in different ways. And so we suffer the lack of empathy from others. Others can treat us well without any empathy for us. And when you don't, as Stan Siegel puts it, when you don't feel felt, there's an ache in the heart. You're not sure you exist for the other person. Yeah, we want other people to give us what we want, but what we most deeply want is we want them to know what we want, right? When you feel like others around you are not present for you, they're not showing up for you, that's very scary and limits the social supplies that are natural and important resources, nutrients psychologically to internalize. So much as children need a rich soup of empathy, one of the things that I kind of learned early in graduate school, right around the time our kids were born, was this funny little saying in my mind, thinking about two modes of relating, one being where we join with others, we really tune into their experience and we kind of share experience. The other being a more detached, analytic, objective, problem-solving orientation. Both are important in relationships, but my mantra for myself was start by joining. Start by joining with my wife, my children, my clients, other people. Start there. And often that's all you need to do. And then if you need to move more to a kind of 1,000-foot view where you talk about what's happening objectively and impersonally, if you need to move in the direction of problem solving or needing to assert yourself, it's going to usually go an awful lot better if you began by joining in the first place.
There's such a huge power in connection, isn't there?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It calms others down. It gives you useful information. It's important to realize that joining does not equal agreement
Mhm.
or approval or waiving your own rights. You still retain that fundamental core of autonomy that you can see what you see and choose what you choose. Uh, and paradoxically, knowing that actually helps you be more intimate and open and unguarded and undefended with other people.
Beautiful. Thank you. Let's go from there. Let's talk about grit, unlearning helplessness, and we're going to go there again. Another lesson learned hiking, in this case in the Sequoia National Park, climbing uphill in snowshoes.
Oh, that's so interesting. Well, um, grit is something that, it's kind of that core inside us of steadfastness and perseverance and we just cannot be broken. Great. People sort of think of it as something you've got,
Mhm.
and that's just the way it is. Well, it's actually a resource, and you can exhaust it, you can use it up, and you can grow it. And one thing I learned in that episode, I was with my good friend Bob, and he's a real mensch, and he's an athlete, a gymnast in high school, and so he took it upon himself as we were in snowshoes moving through soft snow. I don't know if people have done it; it's extremely fatiguing to move uphill through soft snow in snowshoes because with every step you're lifting the snow that falls down onto your snowshoe, even if you're moving in the steps that another person has made. And if you're breaking the trail, you're working twice as hard. Well, Bob was breaking the trail. He's a very intense guy. He just poured out, poured out, poured out, and he began to freeze to death. He had flipped over. He developed hypothermia, such that no matter how many jumping jacks he did, he could not warm himself from the inside out. He needed external sources of nurturance and warmth. So I set up the tent, got the stove going, bundled him into a sleeping bag, warmed him up with my own body heat, and started pouring hot liquids into him, and he was okay. But the big lesson there, first of all, is to be careful with our own scarce resources of grit and to be thoughtful that life is usually more like a marathon than a sprint. And we need to pace ourselves for the long journey. And being the first to get to the goal 10, 20 years out, rather than the person who's a flash in the pan. The second big takeaway is to realize that you can develop grit as a fundamental resource. And to be really frank, um, I'm a nerdy, dorky, skinny guy, nearsighted. I wore glasses when I was young. Now I wear contacts. And I did not realize that I really could become quite tough
Mhm.
and gritty and determined. And I developed that inside myself. I mean, I'm polite, I'm diplomatic. I don't want to go to war with people. On the other hand, I'm the kind of person that, boy, oh boy, oh boy, I'm going to keep on going no matter what. And that's something you can develop in yourself.
You share actually a story where you flipped the switch on fierceness. You went back and it was like grade school or something. You were hiking, maybe as a school child, to retrieve somebody else's jacket. You
Oh,
think
yeah.
you might get lost or you're lost, you might freeze to death, and that switch flipped in you.
That's true. You really got another very central moment in my life. I was up in Yosemite. I was helping some kids on a hike. One of them left his jacket back where we had lunch. I went back to go get it, having left my own pack a couple miles down the trail, just to go back and get the kid's jacket. And I got lost. So I found his jacket, but it was too small for me. But that's a detail. And I was totally lost. And I started to panic. I was alone in the middle of nowhere. No one was around. I could yell. No one would hear me. I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. It was
Yeah.
going to get really cold in a few hours. And this amazing thing came over me, especially as a contrast to my normal kind of hyper rational, nice boy kind of training. Man, I felt like a feral hawk. I was going to do whatever it took
Yeah.
to deal and to survive. And it's not that the hawk hates the rabbit. It's not personal. The hawk is going to do what it needs to do to, live to see the sunrise. And so that was very profound to me. And that energized me to, figure out what I needed to do, cast about, finally find the trail, and make it all the way back to my friends very, very late that night who wondered, wow, what happened to you? We were worried. And I think that's very important for people to tap into, to be clear. Uh, I have a deep commitment, as you know, and you share it, to benevolence and to morality and operating with integrity for all kinds of reasons. That said, I think it's very important for people to claim for themselves something inside that you could say is wild. It's untamed. It's untamed, even feral. It's not immoral, but it's feral. And I think that's a deep, bone deep source of grit and resilience in general.
On that note, doubling back to the beginning of the interview, real early on, you were talking about political powers and trust and what's the truth and things of this sort.
Mm.
We end up, particularly in this society, maybe it's all societies, maybe it's part of the human experience, we end up learning helplessness. How do we begin to unlearn this?
One of the most compelling research findings of the last 50 years involved studies initially on dogs, and the ethical standards then were looser than they are now. So I'm not defending what was done, but the essence of the process was randomly assigning dogs to two groups who experienced, I'll spare you some of the details, they're a little disturbing, especially if you really love animals. Each group was exposed to the same amount of pain during the training phase, but the difference was, I'll call it the A group dogs, had control over how much pain they experienced, while the B group dogs, and each of the B group dogs was matched to an A group dog. So they all experienced the same amount of pain, but the A group dogs had influence over their fate. And then in the second phase, they put these dogs into a different environment where they stressed them, and they wanted to see how rapidly the dogs would engage adaptive behaviors, including escape behaviors. They would take action. They would be resourceful. And they figured the B group dogs that had been trained in helplessness would be a little passive, but would learn really fast. What was shocking to the researchers was that the B group dogs didn't learn at all. They just sizzled in the pain. And there's a lot of extension from that research to human models of depression and other forms of feeling inadequate or immobilized or traumatized in life. Because dogs and we share very much the same mammalian, emotional, and motivational neuropsychological machinery. So the takeaway is really twofold. Number one, don't train in helplessness in the first place. Look for any little opportunity. The more that the forces of life are arrayed against you, because they often are. You're pushed around by forces. Maybe you're grappling with a condition inside yourself, like a disability. Maybe you've had a shocking loss. Maybe you belong to a group of people that's routinely prejudiced against or discriminated against or oppressed by others. That's real. The more the odds are stacked, more the deck is stacked against you, the more important it is to look for those choices, those little opportunities, whether it's picking the salt rather than the pepper, or shifting in a chair that you want to shift in, or playing the song you want to play, or choosing the word you want to use with another person. The more important it is to focus on those forms of efficacy. And much as we can routinely learn helplessness, and as mammals, we're very, very vulnerable to that. Really respect the power of a few or even a single experience of helplessness, immobilization, and defeat to train people into a sense of futility. Really respect that in your own life and in your influence on other people. And then also do what you can to unlearn it by looking for all kinds of experiences, neurons that fire together, wire together. Look for experiences of efficacy, choosing, influence, being a doer rather than one who is done to. And when you're having those experiences, those neurons are firing together, slow it down, receive it into yourself, make room for that felt sense of potency, and you'll be growing it increasingly inside yourself and your brain over time.
Awesome. You're making me think of strengthening the inner muscle of confidence, and a really wild story that kind of ties into this. Read in the paper last week that they I think maybe captured a Mexican wolf that they were bringing to the Denver Zoo because they're endangered, and so they were going to bring it to the Denver Zoo for a breeding program. The Mexican wolf, being wild, had a very strong confidence muscle. The wolves that were already there, had been there a while, had turned, like the elephants who get the steak when they're a little child or a little baby elephant, had learned helplessness. You know what that Mexican wolf did the first evening, right? It's on the loose. I could just
really
picture its
interesting.
smile.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Yeah, that's a great story. That's really great.
So, because it had learned
No further
helplessness.
comment. It stands on its own.
Yes. So how do we start to really strengthen that inner confidence? Because when we're beaten down, I'm guessing it's tiny little steps we need to take, tiny little pull in a little confidence here, a little confidence there, to be able to build ourselves back up.
Yeah. Well, I think it's useful to distinguish between worth and a sense of your worth, and then a sense of your capability. So, and confidence comes from both of those. Mm-hmm. So I know a lot of people, Michael, you probably do too. They can list 10 or even 100 positive characteristics they have, mm-hmm. and they still feel bad about themselves. Because self-worth is something that's more nonverbal and emotional and somatic. It's deeper than self-esteem. So we build up feelings of self-worth through two pathways. Mm-hmm. One, especially when we're young, is from the outside in, the regard that others have for us, including empathy, which means essentially that we exist for them inside their minds, and we land on them. They are willing to be affected by us, because that's the real essence of empathy. We let other people affect us in some way so that we get a sense of what it's like to be them over there. So when we're having experiences with other people who value us or like us or include us or even love and cherish us, it's really important bit by bit by bit to take those in. I landed in adulthood, as you know from my book, feeling like there was an enormous hole in my heart because of the lack of normal range experiences of being included and seen and valued by other people, including in my own family, and also very much with my peers. So bit by bit, it felt like brick by brick, a few bricks a day, I was filling up that hole in my heart that initially seemed like a construction site for some big skyscraper, was enormous holes. But each brick was small in proportion to the hole, and yet several bricks a day, day after day after day, the months and the years began to add up. So when you're having those opportunities to experience various aspects of being valued and cared about by others, slow it down. Once you get those neurons firing together, wire them into yourself, help it sink in. That's the outside in form of rebuilding your sense of worth. The other is much more inside out, and it's a very important source. Sometimes people reduce self-worth entirely to what we take in from others, and I reject that. I don't think that's true scientifically, and also I reject it pragmatically, because it then means that we're completely dependent on how other people see us. And, as Jean-Paul Sartre apparently said a long time ago, hell is other people. So, we don't always know what's going on outside us. So inside yourself, when you recognize your own good heart, when you feel deep down your good intentions, when you can feel your own moxie, your own spunk, your own creativity, your own good humor, your own capabilities, when you have a recognition of your own good qualities, feel it, don't just see it, and then take that experience into yourself. So that's a way to build up self-worth. I think that's really important. And then just to finish fast on capability, when you're appraising different situations, like a business situation or a relationship situation, we can make two kinds of mistakes. We can overestimate our capabilities or underestimate them. The risk of overestimating our capabilities is usually pretty small. We might be a little arrogant, but we're probably not going to put ourselves into a life-threatening situation. On the other hand, if we underestimate our capabilities, very often it's going to be okay. We're not going to get into any kind of big trouble. So we tend to underestimate how good we are, is my point. So it's really important to see what you're actually able to do and to be more realistic. I don't believe in positive thinking, but I do believe in realistic thinking. Appraising yourself accurately so that you realistically see so many of the great things you're capable of, and you realistically appraise other people, how much they actually are cheering you on, and how much they actually would be there for you, or do have things you can ask for from them. See that realistically, and then also assess the odds accurately of success. Probably you are much more capable than you think you are. Others are probably more supportive than you think they are,
Mm-hmm.
and the odds of success are probably much greater than you think they are.
Awesome. So I want to, one of the challenges, one of the themes I've been having with coaching clients lately is I'm going to call it Michael A and Michael B. And I want to get your take on this, which is when a client knows what to do, but is unable to do it because they go from the person who's capable and can do it and is heading toward their dreams, and all of a sudden they jump back onto an old version of old railroad track of themselves. How do we help them bring themselves forward to the vision they want to hold for themselves?
That's great. I think there are two things that immediately pop out. I relate to this issue a lot, both in myself and in helping other people. The first, it really helps to anchor, use that word which I got from NLP a long time ago,
Yep.
neuro-linguistic programming, to really anchor and ground in yourself the felt sense of being resourced, or the felt sense of the way you want to be, the way of being. You want to help it, in effect, you want to help that way of being establish itself in you and to establish yourself in it. So that grounding, that embodiment of the way you want to be is really important to reinforce again and again and again, and hardwire it into the brain and the body. Point one. Point two, I think it's really important when we work with people not to underestimate the power of the dreaded experience. Very often, people consciously do want to be this new way.
Yeah.
They do want to stand up and speak up and stand out. They really do. And yet, deep down inside, that 3-year-old inside, that 13-year-old inside, or that 23-year-old inside is just knows that it'll be a terrible mistake, because that's what happened back then to themselves, or they saw it happening to others, or they knew it could happen if they really, really did stand out. So I think it's very important to help people become mindfully self-aware of these dreaded experiences and the power they have on us today, and not to feel ashamed about them. They're perfectly normal, and in fact, they're adaptive. It's wise to avoid the dreaded experience, including being eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. There's a place for that. But the problem is we overgeneralize pain and we undergeneralize pleasure. We overgeneralize those difficult, horrible experiences, and we make a universal law out of them. And those times when we actually felt good, or it went well, or we were successful, we tend to think that they're just one-offs. We undergeneralize those. And so with clients, I think it's very helpful as a coach or anybody who's trying to work with others, and it's helpful to do it in yourself, to really identify the specific dreaded experiences that a person fears or anticipates or thinks there could be a risk of them having, based on what could happen if they are the full, strong, authentic being they really can be. And then think about what specific resources would be useful to deal with those dreaded experiences, so that the person is more prepared to risk them and is also more likely to be successful in preventing them from occurring in the first place.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. What's the importance of generosity?
Wow. Well, to be a little personal for a moment, when I look back on my own kind of last 30 years really of inner practice, pretty significant chunk, certainly my adulthood, there were some major liftoff points. Yeah. There was clear that, wow, that really made a big difference. So one of the very first was deciding to systematically engage the study of the mind, which for me was an integration of psychology, neuroscience, and contemplative practice. That was very powerful. That's been very powerful for me. And then building on that, focusing on concentration or steadiness of mind, not just meditating, kind of relaxing and being calm and mellow, but to actually take it on in a more muscular way. That really was powerful. And then third big kind of contributor was valuing positive emotion and moving from a kind of grim, dour, trudging forward through the path of practice to really appreciating the power of happiness and love and contentment and even bliss. Wow, that was really great. And then recently, or I would say really in the last, half dozen plus years, the power of generosity, the open hand, the undefended heart that recognizes the enlightened self-interest in addition to the morality in being generous with others. That's really, really, really been a huge, huge, huge thing for me. And one key point about that is to appreciate that most generosity is intangible and non-commercial. We understandably think, including at this time of year, as now we're approaching the holidays, we think in terms of annual contributions to charity and things like that. There's a place for that, sure. There's an economy, it draws on money. There's a place for that. But most of our generosity is not monetary. It's gifts of service, or it's not even tangible, like the gift of attention. Like you pay very close attention. I experience and appreciate your generosity in that regard, for example. The gift of a restraint. I actually gave a little Dharma talk last night in my meditation group, and I talked about 3 forms of generosity that are often easy to overlook inside ourselves. And it's helpful to appreciate ourselves for being generous in those ways, and also look for how those forms of generosity could help things go better, including in difficult relationships, namely the generosity of presence, showing up your whole being and giving others your full attention in a sustained way for more than a few seconds in a row. The generosity of spaciousness, in which we make room for other people. We make room for them to join the group or to have a seat at the table. We make room for their opinions in the meetings. We make room for them in our own mind. We don't feel we just have to fight back so quickly or show them the error in their ways so fast. We let them have their moment. And also, third, the generosity of blessing, of seeing the best in others, to seeing the good in them, even in difficult people. So you flip it around, you just think, wow, what's it like to be with someone who's giving you the generosity of their full presence, a spaciousness in which there's room for you to breathe and room for you to fill, and the generosity, the gift to you of seeing the good in you, the recognition of what is good in you. It's just wonderful. We start to shine, and then we give more to them in a lovely upward spiral.
Woohoo! This has been beautiful, Rick. Before we start to wrap things up, what one homework assignment? I'm going to take my coaching cap. I'm going to put it on you now. What one homework assignment would you give people today to help them become more resilient?
Well, I would love to give people 3, but I will.
If you could do them fairly quickly, we'll take all 3. I'll be greedy in the name of generosity.
Thank you. Anyone's good. 3 or better. Takes less than 10 minutes a day. 1, as you move through your day, deliberately look for half a dozen times for a breath or 2 or longer to take in the good informally on the fly. Whatever it might be. You finish the dishes, you have a nice chat with a friend, you finally make it to the bathroom, you kick back at the end of the day after you put the kids to bed, your sports team wins, something, a moment right there. That's number 1. Number 2, know one inner strength you're focusing on experiencing and growing in your life these days. It's okay to have another couple, but know one in particular. A lot of people don't know what they're trying to develop inside themselves these days. It's not really well specified for them. So they don't know when they're experiencing it, and they don't know how to internalize it. So pick the one thing you're really trying to develop inside yourself these days. Know what that is. And look for opportunities, a minute or 2 or 3 each day, to have an experience of it, 1 or more experiences of it that you take in. Great. Now we're up to about 5 minutes. That's about 5 minutes a day.
Yep.
And it will make a radical, profound change if you do it for one day, let alone 10 days in a row. The third suggestion is every day for 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 minutes or longer, reset to deep green. What I mean by that is resilience is about meeting needs.
Mm-hmm.
When we don't feel our needs are met, we understandably go into the red zone, fight, flight, freeze. Mother Nature's plan is for her little creatures to go into the red zone only occasionally and to recover quickly back to green. But humans in modern lives live chronically in what you might call the pink zone of mild but chronic low-grade stress with a fair amount of other pressure and spikes that are moderate, if not severe. So the reset to that is to marinate for a minute or two or more each day in a fundamental sense of feeling safe enough, satisfied enough in the moment, and connected enough in the moment. In other words, marinate in deep experiences of our three fundamental needs being sufficiently met right now. And now. And now. They may not be met in the future, they may not have been met in the past, but now, during this little 1-minute meditation or 5 minutes of marinating in deep green, you can rest in and take those experiences into yourself. And that is probably the single most powerful, radical way to build up an unshakable core of resilience in the visceral core of your body, your heart, your lungs, your viscera, and your deep sense of feeling peaceful, contented, and loving, which is what we feel when we feel safe enough, satisfied enough, and connected enough.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So on that note, where can people go to find your book, Resilient, and find out about your latest program, The Foundations of Wellbeing?
Oh, that's cool. Well, the book itself is available everywhere, digital, your favorite bookseller, the big online sellers like Barnes and Nobles or Amazon, Barnes and Noble or Amazon. It's all over the place. So thank you very much for that. My online program, I think in the show notes for this show and on your own website, you'll have a listing for that program. People should check it out. It's called The Foundations of Wellbeing. The book Resilient is based on that online program. Nearly 15,000 people already have done that program, many of them on scholarship. It's reasonably priced. We ask people to pay it if they can, but certainly if someone just can't pay it, we love giving scholarships. They can learn more. It's basically about an hour a week for a year, although you can speed it up or slow it down however you want. And we have tons of guest experts. Each week is a wonderful guided meditation from me and a little mini talk. And week by week, bit by bit, in a very thorough and comprehensive way, in this online program that's very experiential. It's more experiential than a book can be by its very nature. You really can grow profoundly useful inner resources inside yourself for your own sake and that of other people.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So if you come on over to InspireNationShow.com, we'll get you over to Rick's The Foundations of Wellbeing and to his book, Resilient, as well. Rick, this has been phenomenal. This certainly, like I said at the beginning, this could be at least 6, probably 12 different interviews, one on each section of the book. Before we maybe dive into a really, really tiny meditation, any last words of wisdom you want to share with people today?
I'll just quote my root teacher, the Buddha. In the Dhammapada, he says, "Think not lightly of good, saying, it will not come to me. Drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise one, gathering it little by little, fills oneself with good."
Woohoo! Thank you so much, Rick. Would you have time for a very, very brief meditation?
Sure. How many minutes or seconds?
Let's say 1 to 3 minutes. How's that?
Okay, that's great. Setting the expectation here. All right. Well, I think I'll do it this way. Ready? Here we go.
Yeah.
So, taking a breath and letting your body relax. Simply being a body, breathing. Sounds come and go, thoughts come and go, and you remain. The awareness, the beingness through which experiences pass. And as you breathe here, you can be aware of any unnecessary anxiety or uneasiness or bracing, and see if you can let that go as you help yourself feel as safe as you possibly can. Noticing that you're actually all right now, and opening to a growing sense of peace. Also being aware of opportunities to feel satisfied enough already. Knowing that you can keep pursuing goals and dreaming big dreams while feeling contented already happy in the core of your being. Even if around the edges there could be anxiety or irritation or physical pain, the core of your being, you can feel already grateful. Seeing what it's like to rest in a feeling of contentment with no need to grasp for anything more. And last, be aware of your own warm-heartedness, ways that you feel cared about by others, even if the relationship is not perfect, ways you feel seen or liked, appreciated, even loved by pets, by friends, perhaps partners. You might strengthen the experience with a hand on your heart. And being aware as well, in addition to receiving caring flowing out from you. Being aware of compassion and tenderness for others, lovingness in you, rippling outward to others. So that you can have a growing sense of resting in love. And then to finish with the last few breaths, seeing what it's like to rest here with a global sense, now and now, of peace and contentment and love. Okay, coming back and knowing that you can still rest here. This is your true home, your true nature. And as you open your eyes or rub your feet on the floor, look around the room, as you do this, you can know that you can keep coming from this place, your own true home, in the days and years of your life ahead.
Woo-hoo. Mush. Thank you.
Sweet.
Thank you so much, Rick. This has been phenomenal.
Oh, thank you, Michael.
Crank it back up for the finish now. Bring it on back up. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get resilient, and begin finding your own true home today. And shine bright. Woohoo!
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick.
Such a pleasure, Michael.
This was beautiful. I love talking with you.
Real pleasure to speak with you too and to hang out with you.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!